Hello there, and welcome to an online Clown Congress 2023 event. This is going to be a dialogue because I'm not going to be part of it. I'm just here to facilitate and get the ball rolling between the guests today, Danielle Levsky and Michelle Matlock, who will introduce themselves in a moment. Danielle and Michelle are going to be discussing their own personal clown approaches to harmful stereotypes experienced as a black and Jewish woman. And in this dialogue, they'll be asking each other questions. I think Danielle is going to take the lead, and we'll see how it works. It could be a clown duo in itself, hopefully. And they're going to be getting into the details of how they work with stereotypes in their clowning. So that's enough from me. I'll hand over to you two. So sit back and enjoy.
All
Thanks.
right. Thank you, John. Thanks so much. I guess let's get ourselves introduced. Michelle, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself first?
I will. My name is Michelle Matlock. I'm based out of Tacoma, Washington, just about 30 miles south of Seattle, which is where I grew up. I am a performing artist, clown, teacher, director, producer, coach, all the things. I've been clowning since the year 2000, although some would say since the day I was born. I've had the great pleasure of clowning with Big Apple Circus Clown Care many years ago in New York City, Bindlestiff Family Circus and Circus Amuck out of New York City, Cirque du Soleil out of Montreal, Canada, and several other weird things over the years. Also the writer and performer of the Mammy Project, which is a solo show, which is an exploration of the icon stereotype and myth of Mammy in America. And I love chocolate chip cookies.
Ooh, a fun fact. Challenge accepted. Thank you, Michelle. So wonderful. Hi, everyone. I am Danielle Levsky. My pronouns are she, they. I am a post-Soviet, Jewish, and queer clown, writer, and educator. Try to say that 5 times fast. All these lovely labels I give myself, we give ourselves. I grew up in a post-Soviet Jewish family. My family immigrated here from Ukraine in the 90s. And a lot of that tradition, resilience, and humor that my family passed on to me has deeply informed my work as a clown, as a writer. I came to clowning also probably when I was born, but more officially in the eyes of the public in 2019. That's a long story, but a small tidbit of it, because I think it says a lot about the way I approach clown and physical theater. Is I was a journalist at the time doing a story about circus in Chicago, and I was interviewing the clowns and I didn't understand them. So I decided to go to a clown jam, and then I went to a clown workshop, and then I went to a clown class, and slowly but surely that snowballed into where we are today. So I worked on several different projects, both of my own creation and with some really wonderful organizations across Chicago, San Diego, and now in the East Coast, where I live in Philly. In particular, a lot of those projects have centered around a clown persona I've created, Baba Yana, the Soviet Jewish grandma clown, that is essentially a culmination of my the matriarchal part of my family's experiences, as well as stereotypes made about Eastern European Jews, as well as my own experiences as a post-Soviet Jewish person moving through the world and trying to understand how I fit into it. I'm really excited to be here today with Michelle and talk about our respective clown personas, our experiences with these topics, how we tackle them from a clown perspective. So really great to be with you here, Michelle.
Yeah, you too. What a pleasure. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd love to get started by talking about Mammy a little bit more with you and the legacy of Nancy Green in particular.
Sure.
I'm curious, what were some of the first stories about Nancy that spoke to you that led to the development of Mammy for you?
Well, I actually um really knew about the caricature and stereotype of Mammy before I even knew of Nancy Green.
Oh,
And so
before the horse. Got it. Yeah.
that that no the finding Nancy Green came a little bit later once I decided that it was time for me to write a show about it and really figure out what was happening around this character. I mean, I just think that it was like the Mammy myth, the character, the stereotype was always popped up in my life in certain ways, just whether if that expectation of the Mammy was put on me or if I just saw it repetitively. And if I think far enough, I mean, all of my great grandmothers who I got to know because for some reason, my family, my great grandmothers outlived their daughters. So I grew up with great grandmothers and not grandmothers. But all of them were, sort of crossed the tracks and took care of white families. And so if I really think about it, that's probably, a little bit of the fire underneath me wanting to know more about Mammy. But it all came down to an audition that I was called for in New York City for the Aunt Jemima pancake mix commercial. And that's when I finally decided I've got to dig deeper and write about this character and write about this history and find out about this history, because I don't understand how I could be called to do something that was so offensive to me and most of the Black women that I grew up with or were friends with. So in that, so when I began to research it is when I found Nancy Green, who was the first woman to play the part of Aunt Jemima. And it was fascinating. There wasn't a lot of information on her at all. It was just that she was this person that was enslaved, that lived through emancipation. And I thought that was amazing because we don't hear about these stories. There was very little about her, and I wanted to know more about her, but I just couldn't find her. And again, this is like, 25 years ago when, Google wasn't around or the internet was just coming on the scene. So I was going to libraries and trying to find things. So I knew that she was fascinating. And then I found the many of the women that played Aunt Jemima over the years. I mean, she was hired in lots of communities. Black women were hired to play her and appear at places, but some of the women were more famous than others. And Nancy Green, being the first, was probably the most famous and traveled around the most during her time. But what it led me to, this absence of her story, led me to slave narratives. And I was able to read these narratives of women that had survived emancipation and what their lives were like. And I used some of their stories to build Nancy Green's story. I took that liberty just because those are the stories that we need to learn and hear. And I figure some of the most common things were probably common for Nancy too, as a person that endured being a slave and lived through emancipation. So that was a long answer to your question, but that's kind of how it is.
Yeah. No, I mean, that was fantastic. And it brought up so many follow-up questions for me. I think one in particular that is coming up for me, and from what little I know of Nancy Green as well, it feels like a lot of the narratives surrounding her and her legacy were written through the lens and the perspective of white people. the idea of like the happy slave imagery that has been normalized and used with Aunt Jemima and with these mammy caricatures. I'm curious how you approach that perspective, that history that's been normalized so frequently throughout our American history to oppress Black women, and how you revert that back into the character that you've created. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, yes, it makes a lot of sense, and that's a great question. And it's true, like a lot of the stuff that I was found was ad copy, um, that blurred the lines between Nancy Green and Aunt Jemima character, and this sort of fantasy made up by basically, white men and white culture, to want to hold on to these, twisted ideas and memories of slavery. So I had to sort of navigate that, and pretty much never was her name ever mentioned when they're talking about her. Even when the radio announcer announced that in her death, they did never said Nancy Green, they said Aunt Jemima. So they
Wow.
really put that on her. And so my way of dealing with that, like, because really, discovering that is super disappointing and painful, that they, just take someone's life and blend it with this stereotype and this fantasy. And really, one of my goals with the show is to develop that real, every enslaved woman living through emancipation story, and which are truths, like the slave narratives. You can't get more truer than that. So taking those stories and making her story, and making sure that I'm building out that story and telling that story, those truths, and then also showing Nancy Green getting into character, which would be the character of Aunt Jemima. So, and then actually performing some of that ad copy that she would have had to have, say, or stories of the plantation that she would have to tell. And so putting those up next to each other in a show, where you see Nancy Green talking about what it was to be enslaved and what it was to go through emancipation and looking for her children, that real truthful story up against this ad copy when she's at the fair and telling stories to the crowd. I think that it shows a pretty stark reality about, just how messed up that is. So my way was to tell her truth, or every enslaved woman's truth, and to also show the twisted fantasy along with that, to show what how this played out, and how sort of ridiculous and absurd, and why, and I hope that it also shows how painful that it could be to certain part of the population, because really that was the gap that's missing for me, is like, how can some of us see this as how can some of us not see how painful this is for others?
Yeah. Especially that Aunt Jemima is often painted as a real person.
Yes.
Huh.
Yes, this is the dilemma, on so many levels, that it erases the true person's history and story. But then when like some of these actresses, some of the more prominent ones that actually are said to have contributed to the success of the brand and even of the recipe, then they want to separate it. Then they want to say no. But that wasn't really it, but yes, no, it is a blurred, there's a blurring there that is, in my eyes, quite damaging. And I think the whole thing, it's like, that is the whole thing, is that these stereotypes, the stereotype of Mammy got blurred and then became, expected in real life. This attitude, this smile, this happiness, this go lucky, like, oh, we're okay with this. That became an expectation for women, for Black women in their real lives. And that's where it's problematic. It's not just something that lives on the TV or in the movies or on stage, but then you're just a regular person trying to, take care of your family and do the best that you can. But all this stuff is expected of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious where you're seeing, there's probably a plethora of examples, but just a couple that come to mind of those prolonged stereotypes appearing for Black women today based on Aunt Jemima's legacy and based on what you perform as Mammy.
Yeah, I think, I mean, gosh, so many things have happened, and we have today, I think, the most opportunities to break out of those stereotypes, and we're seeing it all the time. So it's not as prevalent as it once was in entertainment. I think that, it's growing, but it's still there. Like across the country, there's still plays that are done that require, Black women to be put in this position. I think that there's still most likely an underlying expectation in corporations or jobs, or that's sort of put on Black women to smile and be happy, and but then there's other stereotypes that get fed into that, because Mammy is just like one, but you also have like the Jezebel, the angry Black woman, and all these different things that are like these, in my opinion, made up things that are sort of forced upon Black women everyday lives. So I think that we see it everywhere. I don't think that we see it as it's not as obvious as it once was, but it's still there right under the surface, I think, because all of these things, I believe, get sort of passed down unless we really make an effort to recognize it and change it and challenge our own ways that we grew up, or what we learned behavior. So I'm certain that it's still all there. And even right after the show I did here in Tacoma recently, the Mammy Project, I had a woman of color who runs a dance theater company here, send me, oh God, I can't remember the magazine, but it's a very popular magazine. But these two white women that do this sort of like expose, and one of them is like this Black woman. One of the photos and the costume things they did was a Black woman fully in like Mammy outfit, checkered apron type stuff, and the bandana, and Black woman. It was just like, wow, that is wow, that is current, that's today. And I think it was like the headline, "The Best Memories," or something like this. Whoa. And so you go, whoa, wow, that's incredible. That is right now, and it's just an image, but it's a happy image for them. But when I see that, I'm not as triggered as I once was, because I now know the history behind it, which has helped me understand it. And I don't get as angry anymore. But yeah, but I think it's still around, along with other stereotypes and other fantasies that are put on Black folks in this country.
100%. Wow, I can't believe, unfortunately, I can't believe, I should say, that kind of imagery still exists and calls back to those harmful stereotypes, because we see that kind of representation all the time of Black women, and expectations of behavior for Black women. I saw a really great poet the other day. I think it was through like the Button Poetry organization, but it was this really wonderful performance by a Black woman where she was first speaking to the way that she speaks at work in her mostly like white office versus how she speaks at home with her husband and her family, and like the change in intonation, the change in volume, the raising of the voice to be higher amongst white people and lower when she's amongst her actual family. It was really, really stark. And the contrast is just, it reminds me a lot of this persona of Mammy, of Aunt Jemima, and how it's such a caricature. It's not a real person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Black folks in general have had to navigate sort of both worlds as over time trying to assimilate. And that's the thing, we're always trying to assimilate for the most part, and like, you know, picture of success when that's just not the way that in my opinion, that it has to be or it should be. But yeah, having those two languages, that's something. Speaking two languages. But it made me think about just in your introduction what you were talking about about this clown character that you've created, and you mentioned that you use your skill in art to address stereotypes also. And I'd love to hear how you do that and a little bit more about the character and how you approach this with this work, with clown work and or performance work.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for asking. Yeah. So I think Baba Yana and the experience of a lot of post-Soviet Jews in the States is very interesting in particular because it's so separated from the experience of American Jews. There's some crossover where, anti-Semitism is still vibrant today as it was 50 years ago. And in fact, actually, it's raising to the same levels as it was about 50 to 100 years ago, which is a little troublesome. But the experience of American Jews who have been here for 50, 100 plus years is so different of that of like immigrants from places like the former Soviet Union. Because my family came from being in an experience where they were the people of color in their land to an experience where they like came to the US and suddenly they're white, to gain the status of whiteness and to see like how false of an idea it is that like over time different groups can get that status, and it just feeds into this whole cycle of white supremacy. So going back to Baba Yana and less of this conceptual idea, Baba Yana is very much a reflection of like that grandmother, that person that came over from the Soviet Union and is now trying to understand how this society works, how her role in society works, how she responds to anti-Semitism or Jewish stereotypes or tropes, and how she sort of flips them on their head. Some are a lot more insidious and clearly harmful, like the stereotype of Jews being stingy with money or being really greedy. That comes from a really harmful history where when Jewish people were in diaspora and moved through Poland, the only work that they were allowed to have was through collecting taxes. And so all of these stereotypes about Jews being money grubbers, Jews being greedy, Jews like collecting every penny that they have came from the stereotypes of Polish people that they put on Jewish people. And then the fact that it's continued and pestered and transformed different societies through today is astounding. But that's like a very old piece of history. That's like from like the 1700s. A long time ago. But that's a really harmful one that persists. And then there's like less insidious ones, but there's still like microaggressions when you think about Jewish people, where it's like a constant state of anxiety, very There's this culture of like interrupting each other, like trying to get your word out, argumentative, not as passive aggressive with statements or like trying to get what they want. And that I think also comes from the different cultures and places that they've come from. With Baba Yana in particular, people in Eastern Europe are very direct. They're quite loud. They don't really care for like being quiet and in the social norms that we often see in the US. So a lot of that gets made fun of too. So I take all of these ideas as Baba Yana and capitalize on them. Like I exaggerate them even more. But usually throughout the course of a piece, I flip them on its head in some way. Like if Baba Yana is anxious about the fact that nobody in the audience is wearing a coat and winter is just around the corner and everyone's going to get sick and she's having a lot of feelings and stress and high blood pressure about it. Eventually it comes to this like really beautiful, warm place of like this old woman just wants to take care of you all. She just wants you all to be safe and healthy and happy. So kind of trying to approach that, or the idea of like the Yenta, right? The matchmaker. We all know that figure from Fiddler on the Roof. Baba Yana also often does that. She'll meet somebody in the audience that she finds attractive and tells them that she has a nephew or a niece, and she has both. And honestly, if she's open to whatever, she just really wants her grandchildren to get married. And so that's sort of a flip on its head too. Like she's going beyond like cis heteronormative expectations of the people in her family and just wants them to marry anyone. She just wants her grandkids to settle down, to not be alone in this world. So I try to like take these stereotypes and push them past to like, okay, how do we find the love, the source of joy and happiness in that stereotype?
Yeah, I mean, this idea of flipping it is kind of what I try to do too, like with the Mammy character and stereotype, she was so desexualized, which is sort of purposefully done because in reality she was so sexualized. Enslaved women were so sexualized, but this particular character is so like not a threat to the mistress of the house, not a threat to anyone, because it was actually the exact opposite. But I actually in the show imitate a actress in a movie called Imitations of Life, where she's a it was done in the 50s and the 60s and whatever. But anyway, but it actually, when she comes to the door of the white woman that she's going to work for, she ends up doing singing her a very sexy song and a striptease for her. and that was just my attempt, many attempts in the show to flip it, around and just show that other perspective, or that more ridiculous perspective. Or what if it was this? What if these two women were in love? So there was always scenes of the Mammy character rubbing the white woman's foot, or holding her and whispering in her ear, and all these things. And of course, maybe it was just my own queerness that brought that out. But like when I was seeing these things, that's what immediately came to my mind, is like, what if this was what if they were actually lovers,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I love this, so much of what you just said. I was thinking about another thing you said was about the stereotype of coming from something that Jewish folks were maybe forced to do and be tax preparers or whatever. That this just lasted for so long. And it just made me think about like how ridiculous that is. And it made me think about like what sort of white folks did with Black people. It's like, how can you like enslave a people, make them work so hard and build the entire nation basically, but then say that they're lazy? The stereotype of being lazy. These two And then I thought about these two stereotypes, you know, like the lazy Black person and the like stingy Jewish.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, it's twisted, but it makes me laugh.
right.
Just like the ridiculousness of it. Um, but yeah.
And yeah, these stereotypes are often created to box people in. Like it makes me think also of like what Asian people experience in America as like the model minority, right? The amount of pressure that people are put under to perform and behave in a certain way to society's expectations. And I feel like as a clown, that's one of my favorite things to do, right? To take those expectations and subvert them, and make people question why they think the way they do about people like this. In one of the current shows I'm working on, it's called The Crone Chronicles, and it's an adaptation and investigation into the Slavic folktale of Baba Yaga, who is not traditionally a Jewish folktale, but has a lot of what's the word? Like it harkens to a lot of Jewish stereotypes. This portrayal of this Slavic folkloric witch that lives in the woods, that's very different than everyone else, that has a long crooked nose, that has traditions that are different than everyone, and eats differently than other people, and has a strange way of speaking to others, and doesn't need a man to live with her, and all this, all these things that, and I'm like, wow, that sounds a lot like a Jewish person. It sounds a lot like a Jewish woman in a shtetl that doesn't have a husband. And one of the things we do in the show is like we stop it and we ask the audience why we see this woman and other older women across different cultures in such an evil way. What makes them evil? What makes them threatening? So like really people think of like, why do you find the things threatening that you do? What assumptions are you making about those people? How can you invert that narrative for yourself?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so funny. I was just reading something. I can't remember what it was about, like that sort of challenge that you're talking about with asking people, and that a lot of people will try to, like, if they see something outside of what maybe they think or a stereotype, they'll say that, try to make that oh, you're different, rather than saying, oh, actually I'm the one that needs to change how I see it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why I really love that you actually stop and ask that question, that it's conversation. It's really important. It's something that I always do at the end of the Mammy Project, is have a actual discussion about what everybody just went through, because that's where I think, I mean, while I think the show can make people think and go home and have discussions, and it could, make people change or think about things, that if you're actually having the conversation right in the moment, it can be more powerful. And these little, theaters full of people, we can change the world one small audience at a time.
Yeah. Sometimes I find people are more keen to share their thoughts with a stranger than they do somebody close to them. Because a stranger provides anonymity. It provides sort of a safer space to ask questions you're typically afraid to ask, or say things that you're like, I don't actually know if I should say things in this way.
Right.
But when you're anonymous in a room full of strangers in the dark, there's an opportunity to do that, which is immensely powerful for the kinds of discussions that we're having on stage.
For sure. And I think that, the clowning part of it, to be able to make people laugh, also opens a portal for that, for a good discussion and open discussion, which is something that was important to me with the Mammy Project, since it's quite a heavy, subject matter, but bringing as much comedy as I could into it, and even now bringing this show back after not doing it for so many years, being able to use clown and even more, just connection with the audience even more, proved to be really powerful. And some of the conversations I've had thus far since doing it again have been incredible with the audience afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you've utilized humor and tried to like break that tension in your performances?
Well, always just trying to go as ridiculous as I can with things, and that goes back to like kind of trying to turn things on its head. But like, there's a part of the show where I explain where this Mammy character was born out of, which was minstrelsy. Like Aunt Jemima was a character in minstrel shows. And so I sort of do that storytelling, and then I go into being the character, perhaps in a minstrel show, maybe. But really then just trying to use all of the techniques of clowning to have people enjoy it, you know, and just trying to use that humor, because it's a heavy in this, you know, here minstrelsy is heavy, and it's there's so much behind this, like in terms of its connection with clowning. And for Black people in the country, I think that's why the word clowning is kind of like off limits, is because it's so connected to minstrelsy in this country. But for me, who I am a clown and I love clowning, and trying to find more diversity in clowning and bring more diversity to clowning, how do we connect, how do we take out of what I'm trying to say is the bottom line is that we don't have a lot of reference, as like we can't see a lot of Black people clowning in that, way back in that time period, because it has to do with blackface. So we don't know actors and those performing artists and those clowns from then, because it's connected to this horrible horrible thing, right? So I'm trying to find ways to lighten that load and really be able to look at some of these performers as clowns, and explain the blackface thing, but explain also like they're funny and what they're doing is clowning, but it's just done in such a twisted way that we're not able to, we could see through that. We would have references, but anyway, I'm going on about it. But yeah, I try to find the humor as many ways as I can, especially when we're dealing with these deeper subjects, and some of the stuff that's interesting to me, oppressive things that are interesting to me, like minstrelsy, which I will continue to explore, and stereotypes and race and all these things. How can we just laugh at ourselves about it?
Yeah.
Exploring all those different ways. I just felt like I just rambled on in a way that just took us down into an abyss of nonsense.
No, I think it's good nonsense. It's relevant nonsense. Not in the same light, but in a similar time in history, when vaudeville was getting its start too, there were caricatures created of Jewish people as well in the American vaudeville sphere. And then what ended up happening is that Jewish people then entered the vaudeville sphere, and they're like, we're just gonna do the caricatures ourselves. You want Jewish caricatures? Fine, we'll play them. And it was sort of like a reclamation of like, no, you're not gonna make fun of us, we're gonna make fun of us.
Yes. It's similar. Yes, it's very similar. I mean, Black performers did that too. I mean, at the same time, Black performers weren't allowed on stage. So many of them got into blackface so that they could just be on stage. And people didn't know like Burt Williams and George Walker were Black for years, like it was a shock. But I think there was this definite sentiment of like, wait a second, we could do this. but then also it was a big joke because it was like those characters, I think the history goes, if I remember correctly, were like, there was a white man that saw like a bunch of enslaved folks having fun and dancing, and then he decided to like parody that, and that's how blackface started. Kind of, I could just be like putting some things together, but in the end, it turned out that those black folks were actually making fun of white people. And so gonna get in, black people get into blackface to make fun of themselves, making fun of white people. Some crazy story like that, but I don't know if that's true or not, but I just think it's interesting. But similarly, I think black folks were like, well, we could do this way better.
It's a little like Buffon-esque, right? It's like, why are you laughing at me? I'm making fun of you. Like, I'm holding up a mirror to who you are. This is who you are, not me.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's all interesting. It's all fun. And I think at this time, it's time, you know, like this is a time to just be exploding, you know, all of these expectations and stereotypes and myths, and to really bring it to light. And it's like education too. It's just like, you know, I was thinking about, I always feel like I wish that the Black community would look to the Jewish community on how Jewish community it just seems, and I could be wrong, but that the Jewish community, and I know I'm talking in generalizations here, but just like remember, like tell their stories and make museums and just make sure that no one forgets, you know, and that there's just a sense of a community and solidarity around that. Whereas in general, again, I'm talking in general, Black Americans, just because of our history, I think are always looking to white America to do something, you know, and we're, and for me, it's like, we should be doing it. We should be, you know, finding ways to make museums and tell our stories and keep the history and like never forget. Like, no, we're not looking for to anyone else to do that, you know. But with the recent, like you said, surge of anti-Semitism, like I don't, you know, what can we do, like to end this, you know? I mean, we forget how we still forgetting, like, you know, I'm baffled.
I wish I could say I'm baffled, but like humans work in cycles, right? Like we just constantly repeat history over and over again, even if we learn from it, even if we say never again, and like, oh gosh, we would never do this, we would never enslave a group of people again, we would never commit such an atrocity. But then if you look at what is happening across the Middle East,
Yeah.
the amount of genocide that is going on there, and then like the war in Ukraine right now, and then right now what's happening between Azerbaijan and Armenia, like it's never ending. So I mean, I didn't mean to get so dark, but the cycle is inevitable.
I feel the same. Cycle is inevitable. So is it worth, you know, like the work that you're doing, the work that I'm doing? Because I mean, there's surges in all sorts of brutality that still happens here, and racism that still happens here, you know, like, so, you know, how do we take that as artists? How do we like, and as clown, like, is it worth it? Is it, you know, like
the work, I think it still is. I mean, like, I think one of the beautiful gifts we give to people, one of my favorite things about clown, is that we can help people feel their full expression of emotion when they don't have an outlet to do that otherwise, whether that's through humor or sadness or anger or fear. clown allows people to access those most primal emotions and let them out, because sometimes there is no verbal answer to these incredibly complex questions, to these histories that have been going on and repeating themselves time and time again for thousands upon thousands of years. Like, the only way you can react to it is to emit some kind of feeling, to emit some kind of emotion. And humor, I think, most of all, it releases that tension. I think there's a really strong tradition of humor across different disenfranchised groups across the world, because it's like, how else do you deal with pain and tragedy and terror and death? You have to laugh at it, right? That's one of my favorite reasons to be a clown. It's what makes it all worth it. To remind people that, yes, across the world there are children dying and innocent people losing their lives. But you can also watch the sunrise tomorrow, and you can also go like look at the way tree leaves move in the wind, and you can also like accidentally drop all your stuff as you're walking into your house and then trip on your chair and like laugh hysterically about the fact that you don't know how to walk anymore. It's just like there's so many reasons to feel joy and wonder and laugh at the smallest little moments of life, if we only focused on the mass tragedy and atrocity that occur to others and to us and to our people every day. Like, I don't think we could go on.
Well said. Well said. I agree 100%. It's worth it. Yeah, that was beautiful. I don't know that I want to even, like, just, that was it.
Yeah.
We got an applause.
Oh, thank you, John. John's been hiding in the background, just creeping on the conversation.
Well, what a pleasure to have this conversation, really.
Yeah.
Like that. I don't know that I've ever had a conversation like this. And so this is incredible. I want to have more.
Me too. I don't think I've had this like, we went deep. We went all over the place and went deep. And I think we ended up at a really beautiful point. Like, our people, humans, what we've experienced collectively across history it should make all of us want to like rage the streets every single day, right?
Absolutely.
Like, how can you not wake up angry every day at what's happening and what happens and what has happened? And I think we're doing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think it's actually a miracle that we're still here.
Yeah. One of my dear friends that I've known since high school, who is also from Ukraine and actually immigrated here from Ukraine himself. We have been in contact a lot since the war in Ukraine started last year. And he said something to me the other week when I was not feeling as enlightened as I am today. I was upset. I was angry at the state of the world. I just needed to release a lot of feelings and emotions. And what he said to me is like, can you think about the fact that your people have gone through so much war, destruction, death, annihilation, and you're still here? That's incredible. That's a miracle. The fact that you're walking and that you're here is a miracle in itself. And I feel like that's how we need to approach it too. Like, I think that's how you approach it, right? Like, I think that's how I approach it. I think that's so many different people have to approach it. Like, it's a miracle that we're walking here today, that we made it past all of human folly and we're making our own folly on stage.
Yeah, no, I thought about that often when studying history of Black people in this country. I've thought about that. Like, I can't even believe that we still are here. Like the atrocities the murders, you know, the just total foot on the neck mentality that we've lived through in this country and still live through. It's a miracle that that I'm here. Yeah, no, I think it's I agree with you. It's incredible. It can be overwhelming at times to think about, but I think that's right. We're here. So we got to do the do. Did I say do? I hate when I do that.
Almost.
That
That feels like a good place to end on doo-doo.
yeah, yeah. Great.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Danielle.